Hey everyone, welcome to Ex-Fundie Diaries. My name is Ellie, my pronouns are she, her, and today I will be sharing the dramatic conclusion to the Christian romance novel Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. This video is part of an ongoing series called Ex-Fundie Library, where I talk about the harmful Christian books I read growing up. I thought part 3 was going to be a shorter video than part 1 and 2, but you might want to settle in. I think this is going to be a long one. I have lots of notes this time. Thankfully, our content warnings list is a little bit shorter than the last time, though honestly that is not saying much. So domestic violence, violence in general, misogyny and sexism, verbal, emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse, kidnapping and Stockholm syndrome, pedophilia, which this time mostly has to do with the sexualization of a 16-year-old, and that is unfortunately featured very heavily in this part of the book. And finally, sexual assault. And for that one, I will give an extra verbal content warning right before that scene in case anyone would like to skip it. Last time, we left off with Michael and Angel having weird makeup sex that was apparently so mind-blowing that they went all the way to heaven and back again. And as a quick side note, I would like to recommend listening to the Redeeming Love episode of the podcast Good Christian Fun. One of the hosts, Kevin, does a dramatic reading of that scene with a song from the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack in the background, and it is hilarious. He does such an excellent rendition. I think if you like this review, you're also going to like that as well. It's around the 48-minute mark, and I'll put a link to that episode down below. But back to the story. So after this weird makeup sex, they fall asleep, and when Michael wakes up, Angel is gone. She has run away for a third time, I think. I've kind of lost track at this point, but we all know that Michael is going to be breathing down her neck at some point. After arriving in Sacramento, Angel goes to Joseph's store. Joseph was the shopkeeper that originally told Michael who Angel was. His wife and mother are there, and they let Angel stay, and they also give her a job. And even though she insists over and over again to them that she is not going back to Michael, despite them pressuring her and telling her what a great guy he is, Joseph sends word to Michael secretly that Angel is there, and Michael shows up. I'm about to read a fairly long and very distressing scene, and it does include sexual assault. So I wanted to give this content warning, and I will also put the time code on the screen so that you can skip past it if you would like to. Angel froze in shock as Michael walked toward her. He was covered with road dust, his face lined and grim. Joseph sent word you were here. Her heart was galloping. Why did you come? To take you home. She backed away from him. I don't want to go back, she said, wanting to sound firm and indifferent, and sounding neither, as her voice shook. He kept coming. She bumped into a table of boots, sending several thudding to the floor. I knew you wouldn't go back to paradise, he said. She gripped the table behind her for support and stood her ground. What made you so sure? She mocked. He didn't answer. She couldn't read the look in his eyes. When he reached out, she held her breath. He touched her cheek tentatively, and she pressed her lips tightly together to keep them from trembling. I just knew, Amanda. Unable to bear the rush of emotions, she pushed past him frantically. You don't even know why I left you. Michael caught hold of her and swung her around. Oh yes, I do. He pulled her into his arms. You left because of this. He covered her mouth with his. When she tried to push free, he cupped the back of her head. She struggled harder as the betraying warmth stole over her. Just because her body has a physiological reaction to what he did does not mean that it was not sexual assault. And it was. When she stilled finally, Michael slipped the bandana off her hair. Pulling the ribbon loose, he raked his fingers into her hair and tipped her head back. She could feel the fierce pounding of his heart beneath her palms. "That was it, wasn't it?" he said hoarsely. Ashamed, she tried to turn away, but he wouldn't let her. "Wasn't it?" Someone cleared his throat. "Is the store still open?" Michael turned, his hands sliding down her arms. He squeezed her hands gently before releasing her. "No, it's not. Sorry." He crossed the room and politely showed the prospective customer out the door. He closed it firmly after him, set the lock, and flipped over the sign in the window. When Michael turned, he saw Amanda at the back of the store. She stooped over for something near the Franklin stove. He followed and saw she had a carpet bag and was gathering her few things together. His mouth tipped. "We'll go home in the morning." She wouldn't look at him. "You go home. I'm going to San Francisco." He clenched his teeth, striving for patience. Her face was so white and strained. When he tried to touch her again, she moved quickly, putting a barrel between them. She was stuffing her clothes into the bag frantically. "You're in love with me," he said. "Do you think you can run away from that? I mean, she's been trying." She ran away from home and you pursued her on horseback. She jumped out of your wagon and you chased her through the forest. And now she's trying to back away and hiding behind barrels, and you're still chasing her and locking her in this room. At the words, Angel froze, her head down, her hands gripping the bag tightly. Okay, if I have been counting correctly, this is the third time that either Angel or Michael is going to be shaking violently. One would think that the phrase shaking violently would maybe show up in a book once at the most. These characters cannot stop shaking violently. This is the third time that Rivers has written that phrase. She was shaking violently. The effect he had on her was shattering. She began stuffing her clothes into the bag again. The sooner she got away from him, the better. She was trying to stuff her feelings in along with them. "I told you I would never let myself fall in love with anyone, and I meant it. But miracle of miracles, you did, didn't you?" he said, as determined and relentless as ever. "Go away, Michael. Not a chance. Just leave me alone." She rolled up the last skirt and jammed it in with the rest of her things. She snapped the bag shut and glared up at him. "You want to know what it feels like to love me? It feels like you're ripping my heart out." His eyes flashed. "It started feeling that way when you left, not when you were with me." She tried to move past him and he blocked her way. "I saw the way you started looking at me, Amanda. I felt the way you responded that last night. I felt it all the way through me. And it gave you a sense of power, didn't it? Didn't it?" "Yes," he admitted roughly, and caught her arm when she should have retreated to the back door. "But it's not a power I'm going to use against you." That right there is Christian patriarchy. The man is given the power and they both know that he has it according to Christian fundamentalism, and she is supposed to be grateful that he's not using it against her. And of course, in this case, Michael has and is and will continue to, but even in the tamest of Christian patriarchal marriages, it's not equal. And that in itself is wrong and abusive. And it enables shit like this very, very easily. "You're right," she said, trying to tug free. "I'm not going to give you the chance." He yanked the bag from her hand and sent it bouncing off the back wall. "I'm not your father. I'm not Duke. I'm not some gent paying for half an hour in your bed." His hands tightened on her arms. "I'm your husband. I don't take what you feel lightly. I love you. You're my wife." Biting her lip, Angel forced the tears back. Michael gentled. He cupped her face so she couldn't look away from him and saw her heartbreaking struggle against her emotions. "Amanda, I loved giving you pleasure. I love feeling you melt. I love hearing you say my name." "Yeah, we know, Michael. We know." She blushed and he kissed her. He kissed her again, wishing he had the right words to say what he felt. Words would never be enough to show her what he meant. "My love isn't a weapon. It's a lifeline. Reach out and take it and don't let go. When he drew her into his arms this time, she didn't struggle. When she put her arms around him, he sighed, the stress of the past weeks dissolving. This feels good, doesn't it? And right. I couldn't stop thinking about you, she said miserably, pressing closer, inhaling the sweet scent of his body. She had missed this feeling of safety that only came when she was with him. Stockholm Syndrome. And trauma bonding. She's never known safety. She doesn't know what safety feels like. He was so determined to have her. Well, why not let him? Wasn't it what she wanted? To belong to him. To stay with him forever. Wasn't this what she had longed for every moment since she had left him? You make me hope, Michael. I don't know if that's good or not. It's good, he said, holding her close and rejoicing at her admission. It was a beginning. There's a great Redeeming Love blog series that I found by Samantha Field, who is an ex-Fundie who grew up in the IFB church. And I want to read a couple of paragraphs from her post from the series called Assumptions. It's specifically about the scene that I just read to you. When Michael shows up, the first thing he does is sexually assault her. It's the myth that women don't know what we want. If we resist, if we say no, we don't really mean it. Here, that myth is combined with the prevalent idea that women are supposed to find sexual violence arousing. Angel is being attacked by a man she was actively backing away from, tripping over tables and boots. But when he assaults her, she feels a betraying warmth. How many times have we seen this exact scene in other books, in TV, in movies? A woman backing away from a manly man who mans very manly-like until her back hits a wall and he's suddenly there with his manliness and, oh, swoon. Confusingly, Angel's reaction to this whole confrontation again makes sense as an abuse victim. She begins shaking violently as he tries to get her things together to leave. Every other description of her emotional state and actions fits right into what I feel when I'm trying to function through a panic attack. Once again, though, Francine is going to ignore that she's writing a textbook abusive relationship. In this scene, Angel accuses Michael of feeling a sense of power, and he admits it, but then says, "But it's not a power I'm going to use against you." Right. Like you didn't just use your physical power 1 page ago to sexually assault the woman you have manipulated and kidnapped repeatedly. Goddess above, this is awful. I love that description. I agree with it wholeheartedly. And I will put a link to that post and the rest of Samantha's blog series so that you can check that out as well. So Michael brings his kidnapping victim home once again, and there's quite a few pages of evangelical erotica, and I'm going to skip over it just for the sake of time, but there is plenty of that in part 1 and part 2, so you're welcome to go watch that if you haven't seen it already. The next part focuses very heavily on Paul and Miriam. Miriam, despite being only 16, believes that she loves Paul and wants to marry him. And Paul thinks that she's too good for him and that she would be better off with Michael instead. Paul took a side of venison to the Altmans and learned Michael was on his way to Sacramento to bring Angel home. "You don't look very happy about the news," Miriam said, watching him closely. "I'm sure Michael's happy," he said and went for his horse. "He's a fool," he muttered under his breath. Miriam followed him. "He loves her very much." "Is that what you call it?" "What would you call it?" He glanced back at Miriam as he slung the reins over the horse's head, but he didn't answer. "Why don't you like Amanda?" Miriam asked. Paul almost blurted out that her name wasn't Amanda. It was Angel, and she was anything but that, but he kept his tongue. "I've got my reasons," he said. The saddle creaked as he mounted. "You were in love with her, weren't you?" she said flatly. Paul gave a harsh laugh, his grip tightening on the reins. "Did she tell you that?" No, I guessed. Well, you guessed wrong, little Miriam. He turned his horse before she could ask more questions. Taking a step, she called after him. Don't call me little Miriam. I'm 16 years old. Ugh. He didn't need the reminder. Mocking her, he tipped his hat. Good day, ma'am, he drawled and rode away. Oh, I hate that. I hate that. He didn't need the reminder. See, Rivers knows. She knows that Miriam is way too young, that she is 16, that she is a child, and this grown man is sexualizing her. Miriam came over the next morning to invite him to dinner. Venison steaks, she said, and Mama is baking apple pie. She was wearing a pretty yellow dress that made him notice the slender curves of her young body. She noticed the direction of his gaze and blushed. Miriam's dark eyes had a velvety glow to them. Well, she said. Well, what? He said uneasily. Her mouth curved. Will you come this afternoon? She had an enticing smile. No, she didn't. She's a child. She cannot entice you. If you're enticed, that's your problem. Don't sexualize children. Period. End of story. It doesn't matter what they're doing. It's your responsibility not to sexualize them in your mind. Dismayed, he was terse. No, I'll be working through until dusk. He clicked the horse and pushed down hard on the plow, hoping she would take the hint and leave. Had he known she was coming over, he would have put a shirt on. A fine sight he was for an innocent young girl. Oh, it's so uncomfortable to read this, but I think that it is important to read it. As I have said many times, a lot of impressionable teens are reading this. So this is really fucked up, and I am reading it to expose it. Paul couldn't get it out of his head that if Miriam Altman had come along a few months earlier, Michael wouldn't be in the mess he was. Miriam was just right for Michael. If that harlot ran off again, which she undoubtedly would, maybe Michael would come to see it too. This girl would come to his marriage bed a virgin and stay faithful to him to death. She wasn't the kind to cause a man grief. She would give him the children he wanted and make him happy. Oh, this whole thing is so gross. And Michael's even older. He's 26. You have to eat sometime, Miriam said, walking beside him. He didn't look at her. The less he looked at her, the better. Papa and Mama would like to thank you. They said their thanks yesterday. Tell them they're welcome. Don't you like children? Children? He said, lost. I like children well enough. What's that got to do with anything? I just thought you didn't want to come to dinner because there were so many of us. Children! Didn't say that, but I added that. It's implied. She walked with her hands loosely clasped behind her. His gaze swept her body and his mouth went dry. What was your wife like, Paul? The question took him off guard. Sweet. She was very sweet. Was she tall? About your size. Tessie had been smaller, and she'd had light brown hair rather than luxuriant black. And her eyes. He couldn't remember what color Tessie's eyes were when he looked into the deep, soft brown of Miriam's. He's also comparing her to his dead wife and like saying that he doesn't even remember the color of her eyes. It's also just so objectifying, just so generally objectifying. Was she pretty? He looked at Miriam and his heart raced. Your wife, she said, was she pretty? He tried to remember Tessie's face and couldn't. Not with Miriam staring at him the way she was. Her shy fascination with his body gave him a growing panic. She was very pretty, he said, and pulled the horse to an abrupt halt. I think you'd better go home. I'm sure your mother's wondering why you're taking so long. Miriam's face went red. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't mean to keep you. Maybe you'll come for dinner another time. He saw her quick tears as she turned and hurried away. He almost reached out to her, but stopped himself just in time. He clenched his hand and watched her go, an ache in the pit of his stomach. He hadn't meant to be cruel, but if he apologized, she might stay, and she was altogether too tempting for that. Paul never expected her to come back. He was washing at the well when he saw her coming across a grassy field. His heart jumped. Her younger sister Leah was with her this time. He pulled his shirt on and buttoned it while waiting for them to reach him and tell him what they wanted. "Mama sent me," Miriam said apologetically. Her eyes barely touched his. She held out the basket she was carrying. "Thanks," he said roughly, taking it. His hand lightly brushed hers, and her eyes came up. "She needn't have bothered," he said. "Oh, it was Miriam's idea," Leah said, mortifying her older sister further. "Hush, Leah," Miriam said, blushing. She took her sister's hand. "We'd better go. Enjoy your dinner, Paul." I don't want to read this, but I think I should. Paul watched the gentle sway of her hips. "I've got no right to be feeling this way about a girl like her. Tell your mother I'll bring the basket over." "No hurry," Miriam called back. "I'll come get it tomorrow." That was exactly what he didn't want her to do. He would ride over at first light and leave the basket at their door. He put it down and brought up another bucket of cold water. Dousing his face, he cooled himself down. He was in a bad shape when just looking at a pretty 16-year-old girl made him feel this way. He ought to ride to the nearest camp and stop in at the local brothel. The very idea sickened him. Yeah, we feel sick by you too, Paul. So this is a spoiler, but for those who have not read this book and don't know this yet, Paul and Miriam do end up getting married, and Rivers writing this relationship with this grown man and a minor is extremely irresponsible. Yes, it takes place in the 1850s, but the teens that are reading this in the present day, many of them will take this story like gospel. I really trusted her as a Christian writer, and I was extremely influenced by her writing as a 16-year-old, the same age as Miriam. And Rivers hints at Paul's awareness that it is wrong and inappropriate for him to be sexualizing Miriam and seeing her in a romantic way. You know, this part about he was in bad shape when just looking at a pretty 16-year-old girl made him feel this way, implying that he's so horny, he's even sexualizing a child. And according to Rivers, there are two options: sexualize a child or go to a brothel. When in reality, there are many more options, including masturbation. But he's not allowed to masturbate. None of the characters are, because it's seen as sin. It makes me think of that fire metaphor that some pastors use. You know, sex is fire. Inside a covenant marriage with one man and one woman, it keeps you warm, but outside, you're going to get burned. This worldview does not care about age. It doesn't care about consent. It doesn't care about equality. It cares about patriarchy and confining sex to that cis-het monogamous marriage model ensures patriarchy. So not only does Paul think that Miriam would be better for Michael, but Angel thinks that too, and she starts to become jealous of Miriam. Miriam leaned against the door jamb and looked out at her brothers perched on top of the corral fence, watching Michael working with the horse. Angel came to stand with her. It disturbed her the way Miriam was watching Michael. An uncomfortable feeling twisted in her stomach. Miriam smiled. "I was thinking how wonderful it must be to love someone and have them love you back. I'll bet when Michael wants you, he does something about it." Blushing, she straightened from the door jamb. "Mama would faint dead away if she heard me talking like this." Angel looked out at Michael. The pang of jealousy died down, and a tender concern filled her. She gave Miriam a thoughtful look. She loved the girl like a sister. "You want to get married, don't you?" "Yes, but I don't want to marry just anyone," Miriam said. "I want someone wonderful. I want a man to love me the way Michael loves you. I want a man willing to fight for me. I want a man who won't let me walk away from him." Seeing tears in Miriam's eyes, Angel took her hand. "You love Michael?" "Of course I love him. How could I not? He's one of a kind, isn't he?" Miriam put her head back against the jamb and closed her eyes. "Others should be more like him, but they're not," she smiled. I'll never forget the night Mama and I sang Amazing Grace and talked about David. Michael had tears in his eyes, and he wasn't embarrassed about it. He didn't care who saw how much he cared. She wiped tears from her cheeks. Michael's the only man I've ever met who isn't afraid to feel things. He doesn't bury himself alive. Angel looked out at him. It's too bad I met him first. Miriam laughed. Well, if you find the mold, would you make another like him? She hugged Angel. I love you both so much. When Angel asks her, you love Michael, and she says yes, she means in a brotherly way. But conveniently, for Rivers' plot, Angel misunderstands this, and it creates the most unnecessary love square that I will explain in a few minutes. Angel worried about it all afternoon and tried to talk things over with Michael that night. Do you think we could find a man for Miriam? How about Paul? Paul? Aghast, Angel moved away. Miriam doesn't belong with someone like him. She belongs with someone like you. I'm already taken, remember? He pulled her close. Leave it to the Lord. Leave it to the Lord, she muttered. You always want to leave things to the Lord. He could see she wasn't going to let go of it. The Lord already has someone in mind for Miriam. I'm sure of it. Now put it out of your head. Little woman. She almost told him that Miriam was in love with him, but thought better of it. There was nothing more tantalizing to a man than a young girl in love with him. I just want to see her happy and settled. Michael soothed her. She will be, Tirza. A girl like Miriam doesn't go without a husband for long. A girl like Miriam. If you hadn't found me, would you... But I did, didn't I? Yes, you did. She reached up and touched his face. Have you ever been sorry? A few times, he said solemnly, knowing she would expect the truth. He took her hand and turned the wedding ring, looking down at her. You've given me some dark moments. His smile was tender, but that's in the past. He kissed her hand and laid it against his cheek. Tirza, I know what I'm about, and I know who has control of my life. You and I are not an accident. Angel pulled his head down and kissed him, loving his response, loving the way she felt when he took over. I don't think I'll ever get enough of you, Michael Hosea. Never, as long as I live. Nor I of you. Remember that when Michael suggests Paul as a good match for Miriam, he knows that Paul sexually assaulted Angel. But of course, he doesn't see it as assault, and he blames Angel for it. And Angel tries to bring up her concerns about Paul, but Michael defends him. The bro code, I'm assuming. They're at the Altmans, and they're dancing after dinner. Do you want me to talk to Paul? Michael asked her later when John was fiddling and he was dancing with her. No, she said, afraid she would be the cause of an even wider gulf between the two men. She had done enough damage already. He's a decent man, Amanda. He stood by me through some hard times. He's confused right now. And now here she blames herself for his confusion. She knew Paul wasn't confused. He was full of righteous rage and animosity because of her. He was hurting because of her. Why hadn't she thought past her own revenge that day? Couldn't she have ignored his insults? She had known he was jealous. She had known that he thought she wasn't good enough to be Michael's wife. She had known a lot of things about Paul on first sight. Be patient with him, Michael said, as Michael had been patient with her. She would swallow her pride if need be. For Michael's sake, she would take whatever Paul had to throw at her. Michael danced with Miriam, and Angel went to pour herself a cup of cider. Paul came to stand next to her, his dark eyes glinting. He nodded toward Michael, whirling Miriam around. They were both laughing. They look good together, don't they? Angel watched Miriam and felt the pang inside her. They did. They like each other a great deal, she said, and poured a second cup of cider. She held it out to him. Smiling mockingly down at her, he took it. He watched Michael and Miriam again. She should have come a few months earlier. Things would have been a lot different. Michael said it wouldn't have. Of course he'd say that. Paul's mouth curved sardonically. You know, Angel, I haven't seen Michael smile like that in a long, long time. He walked away and stood with John. Angel held her cup of cider clasped between her two hands. Raising her head, she watched the two people she loved most in the world dancing together and wondered if Paul wasn't right about everything. So here's what I mean by this ridiculous, extremely unnecessary love square. Michael wants Angel, and Angel wants Michael. Paul wants Miriam, and Miriam wants Paul. Angel doesn't feel worthy of Michael, and Paul doesn't feel worthy of Miriam. Angel doesn't think Paul is worthy of Miriam, and Paul doesn't think Angel is worthy of Michael. Angel and Paul both think Miriam and Michael should be together, even though neither of them want that. And if Angel had just asked for clarification from Miriam, what do you mean you love him? Or even if she had just told Michael, Miriam's in love with you, this whole thing could have been corrected. But Rivers just wanted to drag it out and make it a big thing, I guess. Paul keeps harassing Angel, and Angel refuses to retaliate, and instead she puts all of her focus on Michael, who she worships. Elizabeth is pregnant with yet another child, and Ruthie, the littlest Altman, asks Angel when she's going to have a baby. And that contributes to Angel's feelings of shame and sadness over not being able to give Michael a child. Elizabeth asks Angel to be her midwife, which makes Miriam feel jealous. So Angel's jealous of Miriam about Michael. Miriam's jealous of Angel about getting to be her mom's midwife. And then Miriam comes over to talk to Michael privately one day. So they walk off together, the two of them, and Angel watches them. And Miriam's upset. And the book says that Michael took her into his arms to comfort her. And Angel feels jealous again. She thinks that they love each other. She asks Michael about it, and he just says, well, she wants a husband, and she wanted a man's opinion on the whole thing. And that's all he'll tell her about it. At this point in the story, God is really pursuing Angel. First, Michael pursued her. Now it's God's turn. And on page 344, she smells God. And I had totally forgotten about this charismatic belief that God has a fragrance. I don't remember ever smelling God growing up, but I always wanted to. So here's that part. A sweet fragrance filled the darkened cabin, a fragrance that defied definition. She filled her lungs with it, so heady and wonderful. What was it? Where did it come from? Her mind whirled with words and phrases Michael had read to her over the past weeks, and even before that. Words she thought she had never heard, but had somehow found their way into the deepest part of her, somewhere inside of her, a place she'd been unable to close off. And then, a still, quiet voice filled the room. I am. Angel sat up abruptly, eyes wide open. She looked around the cabin, but there was no one there other than Michael, who lay sleeping deeply beside her. Who had spoken? She felt fear sweep through her, and she trembled with it. Then it was gone, washed away, and she was calm again, her skin tingling strangely. There is nothing, she whispered. Nothing. She awaited an answer, not moving. But no answer came. No voice filled the stillness. Angel lay down slowly and curled as tightly against Michael as she could. So yeah, kind of random, but I thought it was interesting. One day, Angel is talking with Elizabeth, and she tells Elizabeth that she's pretty sure that Miriam has romantic feelings for Michael, and Elizabeth agrees with her. But she says that she wishes that her daughter would love Paul because she's the perfect age for him. And speaking of creepy age gap stuff, I don't think that the way Paul interacts with Miriam is the only problematic thing here. I actually think that the way that Michael interacts with Miriam is also problematic. She is only 16. She is not a peer to Michael. So it doesn't make sense for them to be close friends. And she may feel like he's a brother to her, but he's not. They are not related, and they barely know each other, really. It's just really creepy. I just feel like the way that even Michael interacts with Miriam is really creepy and inappropriate. And here's an example of that. Michael arrived at dusk. Miriam was the first one out the door to greet him. "I thought Paul was coming back with you." Michael jumped down. He decided to stay in town for a day or two. "Just like a man," Miriam said, but her gaiety was gone. Elizabeth insisted he and Angel stay for dinner. Miriam sat on the other side of Michael and scarcely said a word through the meal. Angel saw Michael put his hand over hers briefly, meaning over Miriam's hand. Michael put his hand over Miriam's hand at the dinner table and whisper something to her. Miriam's eyes filled with tears and she excused herself quickly and left the table. We never know what he whispers in her ear, but it's probably just like, "Don't worry, Paul will come around," or something like that. But, you know, it's not necessary for him to whisper to her. It's not necessary for him to put his hand over hers. Ew, she's 16 and you're 26. Stop being a creep. But we know Michael Hosea is not capable of that. He is a very creepy dude. So I guess he's just being himself, the only way he knows how. And that was just one example, by the way. I'm not going to read them all, but that's not the only example of Michael being creepy and inappropriate with this 16-year-old. On the next page, Angel and Miriam have a conversation about pregnancy. And as usual, Rivers is not subtle in her sexism. Angel stood by the bed for a long moment. Elizabeth was curled on her side, her knees drawn up, and her hand resting protectively on her unborn child. An embrace. Angel looked down at her own flat stomach and spread her hands there. Her eyes burned and she bit her lip. Dropping her hands to her sides, she turned away and saw Miriam standing in the doorway. Miriam smiled wistfully. "I've wondered myself what it would be like. It's a woman's reason for being, isn't it? Our divine privilege. To bring new life into the world and nurture it." She smiled at Angel. "Sometimes I can hardly wait." Angel saw the tears Miriam tried to hide. After all, what good was divine privilege to a virgin girl? Or a barren woman? When Elizabeth goes into labor, Angel does act as her midwife and help deliver the baby. And Elizabeth is a very perfect, godly woman, and she barely makes any noises at all during the entire labor process. And here is Michael and Angel talking about the birth once they're back home. "Elizabeth said you were wonderful." "She was magnificent," Angel said. "She could have managed with no one to help her." She glanced up at him with a sad smile. "It's what being a woman is all about, isn't it? Miriam called having children a divine privilege." She looked away. John's seed was planted in fertile ground. Ew. "Amanda," he said, putting his hand beneath her arm to stop her. "Don't say anything, Michael, please." She didn't bite him when he drew her into his arms. He held her firmly, his hands spread over the back of her head. He wanted to take away the hurt and didn't know how. "Christmas is only a few days away." "Christmas," Angel said, and drew back from Michael. He saw her anguish and felt he was the cause of it. "Amanda." She looked up at him, unable to make out his face in the darkness. "What do I give you for Christmas, Michael? What do I give you when the only thing you really want is a child?" Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she struggled against the emotion rising in her. I wish... "Don't," he said brokenly. She clenched her fist. "I wish Duke hadn't ruined me. I wish no one else had ever touched me. I wish I was like Miriam." "I love you." When she turned away, he yanked her back, pulling her into his arms. "I love you." He kissed her and felt the way she melted into him, clinging to him so desperately. "Michael, I wish I was whole. I wish I was whole for you." And then Michael has this internal prayer. "God, why? John and Elizabeth have 6 children. Will I never beget even one on my wife?" Oh, what a gross way to say that. Beget one on my wife? Why did you allow it to happen this way? "It doesn't matter," he said over and over. "It doesn't matter." But both of them knew it did. Oh. So dramatic. The Altmans name the baby after Saint Michael, of course, and after seeing Michael hold Michael Jr. on Christmas, Angel decides that she has to leave again, for good this time. She's not able to give him a child like he wants, and she needs to leave so that he's free to be with Miriam. Before Angel leaves, though, she decorates the cabin with flowers, she makes venison for dinner, and she takes Michael up to the hill where he had dragged her that one night to show her the sunrise. And then she dances for him like the Shulamite in the Bible. I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. Then they have sex on the hill, because of course, and he realizes that she is saying goodbye to him. And he talks to God about it, and God tells him to let her go. And the next morning, Michael is heading into town for some reason, and so while he goes into town, she packs to leave. And Miriam stops by, tries to get her to stay, and she tells Miriam that she can't have kids, and that that's why she needs to leave, so that Michael can be with someone who can have children. And it's a very dramatic leaving sequence. Miriam's eyes swam. How can you leave him now? I'm begging you, Miriam. Don't make this any more difficult than it already is. I'm going because it's best for Michael. Try to understand, she said brokenly. Miriam, I have to think of what's best for him. The coach was coming at last. Angel stepped quickly into the road and waved to the driver to stop. As he drew rein on the 6 horses, she worked the wedding ring off her finger and held it out to Miriam. Give this back to him for me. It belonged to his mother. Angel reached out and took her hand, put the ring into it, and closed the girl's fingers around it. Turning away quickly, she handed her carpet bag up to the driver. Angel looked at her friend's pale, distraught face. You love him, don't you, Miriam? Yes, I love him. You know I do. She stepped closer. You're wrong to do this. Wrong, Amanda. Angel hugged her tightly. Help me be strong. She held her a moment longer. You're very dear to me. She let go and stepped quickly up into the coach. Don't go, Miriam cried, putting her hands on the window opening. The coach started moving. Angel looked down at her, fighting against the pain. You said you loved him, Miriam. Then love him, and give him the children I can't. Miriam let go in shock. Her face went fiery red and then white. No! Oh no! She started running after the coach, but it was picking up speed and not slowing down. Wait, Amanda! Amanda! I feel like even in this moment, Miriam could have fixed the unnecessary love square by being like, I don't love him that way! And then Angel would have popped her head out of the coach and been like, wait, what? I thought you did. Yeah, no, I love him like a brother. Oh, okay, sorry, could you stop the coach? There are 90 pages left of this book, and it will not end. You would think at this point the book would be coming to a close, but so much happens even after this point. So Angel goes to San Francisco, and the book goes back and forth between what's happening with her and what's happening back on the farm. And I'm just going to tell you what happens at the farm first, and then we'll go back to Angel. And it's about to get creepy, even more creepy than it has been. So Paul can't stand to be around Miriam because he wants her so badly. So he decides to sell his land, and he goes over to the Altmans and asks if John wants to buy his land. And Miriam gets extremely upset. She doesn't want him to leave. She wants to marry him. And she is so convinced that he really does love her as well. So she comes up with a plan to pursue Paul and to get him to realize that they're meant to be together. Oh, Mama, I love him so much it hurts. Elizabeth looked at her husband. But he's married, you know that. Miriam reared up, face red. Paul, Mama, not Michael. Paul, Elizabeth said, greatly relieved. It's always been Paul, and I know he loves me too. He's just too stubborn to admit it, even to himself. She looked at her father. I can't let him leave, Papa. If you buy his land, I'll never forgive you. If I don't, someone else will. He tried to make sense of what was happening. If he loves you, why would he be selling his land so he can leave? I think he might be going for the same reasons Amanda left Michael. How do you propose to stop Paul from leaving? Her father asked. He's made up his mind, Miriam, and that's the way it is. Miriam looked up. I could make him change his mind. Studying his daughter's determined face, John frowned. Just what did you have in mind? Miriam bit her lip and looked between her mother and father. Something from the Bible. She wiped the tears away and sat straighter. What part of the Bible? Her father asked sternly. I know what it'll take, Papa, but you're going to have to trust me. So this next part is extremely uncomfortable to read, and I am not going to read the erotica parts because Miriam is a child. So I'm just going to skip over those parts, but I will read the rest of what happens. Her plan to pursue Paul. Paul awakened to find Miriam stirring the coals and adding wood to his fire. The blanket slid down his bare chest as he sat bolt upright and stared at her. He was dreaming. He must be. Rubbing his face, he looked around and saw her shawl across the back of his chair and a case on the table. She turned toward him and smiled. Good morning. It's almost light. She was real all right. Panic set in. What are you doing here? I'm moving in with you. What? I said, I'm moving in with you. He stared at her as though she had gone out of her mind. She came and sat on the edge of his bed. He pulled the blanket up to cover his bare chest. Miriam watched Paul, and she couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. It was his own fault, if he weren't so stubborn. Ugh, this is just so weird and so cringy. This isn't the least bit funny, he said through his teeth. No, it isn't, she agreed more solemnly. I love you, and I'm not going to let you go off to the mountains and ruin your life. He looked endearingly confused. His hair was poking up in all directions like a little boy's. She reached out to smooth it down, and he drew back, his eyes filled with alarm. Go home, Miriam, he said, desperate. He had to get her out of here. Did she know what it did to him to have her say she loved him? If she didn't leave now, he didn't think he would be able to resist her. But she didn't move. She just sat looking at him with a patient smile. He heard a roaring in his ears and bellowed, I said, go home! No, she said simply, and I'm not giving you your clothes either. She folded her hands and placed them demurely in her lap, then smiled at him. He could barely get his breath. What are you playing at, Miriam Altman? What's your father going to say about this? He already knows. Oh God, he prayed out loud, wondering when John was going to burst in the door with a shotgun in his hand. Papa spent most of last night trying to talk me out of this and finally gave up. I would have been here sooner otherwise. Her smile hinted at mischief. Do you remember the book of Ruth, Paul, in the Bible? Do you remember what she did? Well, Boaz, here I am, at your very feet. Now, what are you going to do about it? She put her hand on his thigh, and he jumped a foot. Don't touch me, he said, beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. I'm telling you, I want you out of here right now. No, you don't. How do you know what I want? He tried to sound angry. I know every time you look at me. You want me. Oh, she's 16, she's 16. Don't do this, he pleaded. Paul, she said very gently, I love Michael very much. He's like an older brother to me, but I'm not in love with him and never will be. I'm in love with you. You don't belong with me, he said, anguished. Don't be ridiculous, she said, as though speaking to a child. Of course I do. Yeah, I'm gonna skip this next part. It's just so inappropriate. It's them talking about how they want each other physically, and then they make out, and she says that even though they just made out, which very hypocritical by Christian fundamentalism standards, she tells Paul that they need to get married before they have sex. He says, I guess we'll have to ride up to Sacramento and see if we can find a preacher. No, we don't. He looked at her, surprised. Blushing, she smiled shyly. Papa said he would marry us himself. He was going through the trunk when I left, looking for his Book of Common Prayer. He was rather in a hurry, I think. I never had a chance, did I? He said, laughing softly. No, you didn't, she smiled, content. Michael always said you'd come around. I just got so tired of waiting. So the first thing I want to say about this whole thing is that it's really weird. All Miriam really had to do was say, I love you to him and have that whole conversation. She didn't have to move in and like refuse to leave and ambush him. And then in terms of this whole Ruth and Boaz thing from the Bible, I think it's a very, very silly comparison. I actually just listened to the most recent episode of Go Home Bible, You're Drunk, a very excellent podcast. They actually just did an episode on the Book of Ruth. It is very funny, but it's also very informative and really explains like what the Book of Ruth was about, and the fact that it actually wasn't what like evangelical Christians like to say that book is about. They also talk about the fact that the whole thing of Ruth uncovering Boaz's feet may have been a euphemism for giving him a blowjob or doing something sexual, because apparently the word for foot is like also the same word for penis. So a part of me wonders if Rivers actually knew that and like kind of used that to her advantage a little bit in this story with Paul and Miriam. Like that's probably why she felt okay having them make out, and also having Paul be naked except for the blankets that were covering him. Just like she had Song of Solomon and like Adam and Eve be a part of Michael and Angel's love scenes, so that when she got pushback from other Christians, she could be like, it's in the Bible. I think she did the same thing with this whole Ruth and Boaz thing. But again, the Book of Ruth has nothing to do with this silly Christian romance novel. I would definitely recommend listening to the podcast if you're interested. The link for that will be down below. So now we're back to Angel in San Francisco. She has started working for a man named Virgil. The reason she got this job in the first place is because God told her to go into that cafe and rest. Virgil needed a cook, and so God was leading her there to become Virgil's cook. But then after 6 months, the cafe burns down for no apparent reason. As they watch the fire burn, guess who shows up? Duke, the pedophile who trafficked her as a child. Because of course, this Christian soap opera is on season 12 by now. Duke tells her to come with him and she doesn't want to go, but then Duke threatens to kill Virgil. And Angel doesn't think that Virgil will be able to hold his own against Duke, so she agrees to go with him because she doesn't want anything bad to happen to Virgil. Every time Angel gets a little bit of independence and autonomy, Rivers turns her back into a damsel in distress. Also, it is really hot in here right now, so I am going to take off this sweater. So then Angel has a dream, I'm assuming from God, because God is pursuing her now. But the dream was so gross to me personally that I almost started to gag reading it. So I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm sure people who are into like horror stuff would probably think that it was fine and not a big deal, but I get very easily grossed out. I'll just tell you that what the dream symbolized was Jesus taking all of Angel's filth upon himself. And I'll read the last couple paragraphs of it. Blinking, she looked up again and saw the man of light covered with her filth. No, she wept. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll take it back. I'll do anything. Yet even as she reached out, the defilement disappeared and he stood before her perfect again. And then God's voice. I am the way, Sarah. Follow me. As she stepped forward and reached out for him, there was a thunderclap. An angel awakened in the darkness. Duke decides to teach Angel a lesson by introducing her to a bunch of men. And as she's waiting to go out on the stage, she hears God's voice. Just when she thought her heart would stop for the terror, she heard it. God's voice. Sarah, beloved. It was the same soft voice she had heard in Michael's cabin, the one she'd heard in her dream. God's voice again. Be still, for I am here. She looked around, but only her guard and the performers were there. Her heart was racing madly, and her skin rose with goosebumps as it had that strange night in the cabin. Where? Where? She whispered frantically. The guard looked down at her questioningly. What's the matter? Did you hear someone speaking? She was shaking violently. This is the 4th time that someone has shaken violently. And this time it's because of the voice of God. So, gosh, it turns out you can shake violently for all sorts of reasons, and these characters do. So then she prays. What do you want me to do? Tell me. Oh God, tell me. And God says, my will. Despair filled her. She didn't know what that was. So she goes out onto the stage and the men yell at her to sing. So she sings Rock of Ages. And then she yells at the crowd, what are you doing here? Why are you not back with your wives and your children? This makes Duke furious, and he's about to hit her when this man from the crowd steps in and asks Angel if she wants to leave. And she says yes, but not until she goes to get these younger girls who were being held prisoner by Duke. And one is 8 and one is 13. And this man who is helping her says that they're going to go out the front door so that they can expose Duke for what he is, meaning showing everyone that he has these very young girls that he has trafficked. And Angel's worried that someone's going to stop them, but he says that he owns the biggest bank in San Francisco, so no one would dare try to stop him. And I just want to point out that I definitely see a lot of prosperity gospel in Rivers' writing. Most of the Christian characters are extremely successful. And of course, this guy is a Christian. Oh, the man's name is Jonathan Axel, by the way, I forgot to mention that. His wife's name is Priscilla, his daughter's name is Susanna, and he takes Angel and the 2 young girls to their home. They talk about God, and she lives with them for a while. And the 2 young girls that she helped escape get adopted very quickly and easily. I don't think it would be that simple in real life, but that's what happens in this book. The Axels were well known and highly respected in the community. Angel wondered what would happen if she were out from beneath their protective wings. At the first sign of hardship, would she weaken again? It was a thought that made her swallow her pride and accept the Axels' continued goodwill. She even began going to church with them, feeling insulated and protected with Jonathan and Priscilla on one side and Susanna on the other. She drank in the words of salvation and redemption, though she felt she had no right to them. She was so hungry and thirsty, she panted like a deer after the water of life. That is a scripture verse and a worship song. Remembering as she listened, the dream she had had. Oh God, it was you speaking to me, wasn't it? It was you. And that night in the cabin so long ago when I smelled that wonderful fragrance and thought I heard someone speaking to me, it was you. Everything Michael had said to her, everything he had done, made sense to her now. He had lived Christ so that she could understand. Each Sunday following the sermon, the pastor gave an invitation to anyone wanting to receive Christ as their Savior and Lord. The still, quiet voice beckoned tenderly. Come to me, beloved. Stand and come to me. Warmth swept over her. This was the love she'd been waiting for all her life. Yet she could not move. Oh, Michael, if only you were here with me today. If only you were here to walk forward with me. Maybe then I'd have the courage. Each Sunday she closed her eyes, trying to gather her nerve to answer the call, and each Sunday she failed to do it. She sat trembling, knowing she was unworthy, knowing that after all she had said against God, she had no right to be his child. On the 4th Sunday, Susanna leaned close and whispered, You want to go forward, don't you? You've wanted to for weeks. So Susanna is filling Miriam's shoes here, pressuring her and making her uncomfortable. Eyes stinging, throat closed tight, Angel nodded once and hung her head, her lips pressed together. She was afraid, so afraid she was shaking. Shaking violently? Not this time. What right had she to present herself to God and receive mercy? What right? I'll walk with you, Susanna said, and took her hand firmly. It was the longest walk of Angel's life as she went down the aisle and faced the pastor waiting at the end of it. He was smiling, his eyes shining. She thought of Michael and felt a rush of anguish. Oh, Michael, I wish you were here with me now. I wish you were here to see this. Will you ever know? You struck the match and brought light into my darkness? Here's that moment that Francine Rivers talked about in the interview in part 2. The scene that she added because it was so important to her. Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? The pastor asked her. I believe, she said, with grave dignity, and closed her eyes briefly. Oh God, forgive my unbelief. Make my faith larger than a mustard seed, Jesus. Let it grow, please. And do you give your life to Jesus now before these witnesses? If so, would you signify by saying, I do? Words meant for a wedding ceremony. A sad smile touched her lips. With Michael, she had said, why not, rather than I do. She had come to the end of her endurance and felt she had no choice. She felt that now. Great, that's encouraging. She had come to the end of her struggles, the end of her fight to survive on her own. She needed God. She wanted him. He had brought her out of her old life when she had no faith. And now that she knew he really was there, he was holding out his hand to her and making a proposal. Oh, Michael, this is what you wanted for me, isn't it? This is what you meant when you said someday I'd have to make a choice. Angel? The pastor said, perplexed. No one breathed or moved. I do, she responded, smiling radiantly. I most assuredly do. He laughed. Turning her toward the congregation, he said, This is Angel, a new sister in Christ. Welcome her. And they did. But things couldn't stay the same. She felt that in her very soul. She wasn't meant to stay in this safe bubble, protected by the Axels. Sooner or later, she was going to have to leave them and find out if she could stand on her own. First, she had to figure out what she was going to do with her life. So now that Angel has been saved and converted and she's officially a Christian now, she and Susanna decide to open up a boarding school that they call the House of Magdalena. It's for girls and young women who want to get out of sex work so they can learn skills like sewing and cooking so that they can have other ways to provide for themselves. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, we get 2 or 3 rushed pages about that before Paul shows up. Our good old buddy Paul. And the reason Paul is there is because he's trying to save his marriage. Miriam has pressured him to go get Angel and bring her back for Michael. So Paul and Angel have a talk. He realizes that he misjudged her and he feels really bad, and he keeps asking her to come home, and she says that she needs to help run the House of Magdalena. Magdalena is one of the things I need to think about, Paul. They need me here. And Paul says, no matter how good a cause, it's just an excuse now. Pass the torch to someone else. That tall lady with the laughing eyes looked like she could take care of things. He went to the door. Your first obligation is to Michael. He had said all he could. I'll wait until noon tomorrow at the latest. Then I'm going home. So she thinks about it for a little bit. She prays about it. God says, Sarah, beloved. And apparently that's all the answer she needs. She is going home to Michael. Angel went up the stairs. She saw light beneath Susanna's door and tapped. Come in, Angel answered. What's happened? Susanna asked, getting up from bed and coming to her. She took her hands. You look so pale. We missed you at dinner. Who was that man? A friend. Susanna, I want you to run Magdalena for me. This is such a rushed section. Like, this whole House of Magdalena thing literally gets a couple of pages. It's supposed to represent, like, I forget, but I think it's like 3 years of her life. She's been doing this for 3 years with Susanna. And then literally she just says, Susanna, I want you to run Magdalena for me. Me? She said, astounded. She looked less assured than Angel ever remembered. She let go of her hands and stepped back. You can't mean it. I couldn't. I mean it, and yes, you can. Susanna was more than capable of handling things. She just didn't know it yet. She would walk through the fire and come out the other side even stronger than now. Angel was suddenly very sure of that. Well, that's convenient. But why? Where are you going? Home, Angel said. I'm going home. Okay, well, we've come to the famous ending scene. We couldn't avoid it forever. I'm really curious, once I eventually hate watch Redeeming Love the movie, I'm very curious to see how they do this ending scene. Angel could see Michael working in the field. She was so full of conflicting emotions, she could hardly bear it. Self-doubt, self-hatred, struggling pride, and fear. All the things that had sent her running so long ago, and some that had kept her from going to him before now. She couldn't allow them to stop her again. Oh God, give me strength. Please, walk with me. Help me. I don't know if I can go through this. And God says, I have not given you a heart of fear. She knew the moment Michael saw her. He glanced up as she was crossing the meadow. He stood very still, staring at her in the distance. I mustn't cry. I mustn't. She kept walking toward him. He didn't move. Doubt stirred again, but she fought it down. She wanted to shed all the barriers that had kept her from him, all those months of defiance and fear and uncertainty. She wanted to discard the horrible memories of her childhood and the guilt she had taken on herself for things she had been powerless to stop. If only things had been different. She wanted so desperately to be clean for him, to be new. She wanted to please him. She would give the rest of her life to that end if he would let her. She wanted to strip away her past. Oh, if she could only be Eve again, a new creature in paradise before the fall. With trembling hands, she removed the trappings of the world. Here we go. She dropped her shawl and took off the woolen jacket. She worked at the tiny buttons of the shirtwaist. She shrugged it off and let it drop as she walked. She unhooked her skirt and let it slide down over her hips and to the ground. She stepped out of it. Without faltering, she walked toward him. She had never said all she should have. He didn't know what he had done for her. He had been like the sea, sometimes storm-cast, with waves crashing against a cliff wall. Other times he was like the steady, lapping surf. Always he had been like the tide. Oh, washing her shore, reshaping her coastline. Lord, no matter what he does or says, I have to thank him. He was always your good and faithful servant, and I never thanked him. Not enough. Oh God, never, never enough. She removed the camisole and slips, the corset cover and corset, and pantalettes. With each garment she removed and dropped. She had one single abiding purpose, to show Michael she loved him, and she peeled away the layers of pride, one by one, until she was humbled by her own nakedness. Last of all, she stepped out of her thin leather shoes and drew the pins that held her hair. That was the order. She took off all her clothes. So she was completely naked, but still wearing her shoes? That's really funny to me for some reason. As she came close, she saw the gray at his temples and the new lines in his beloved face. When she looked into his eyes, everything she felt spilled over. She had always known her own pain and loneliness, her own need. Now she came to face his. Oh, what had she done to him in denying her love, in turning away? She had played God and done what she thought best for him, and all she had done was cause him pain. She thought he was too strong to be hurt, too wise to wait. How much had her martyrdom cost him? All her carefully planned words fled. So many words to say a simple, heartfelt thing. I love you, and I'm sorry. She could not even speak. The tears that had been frozen inside her all her life came, and the last bastion melted away in a flood. Weeping, Angel sank to her knees. Hot tears fell on his boots. She wiped them away with her hair. She bent over, heartbroken, and put her hands on his feet. "Oh, Michael, Michael, I'm sorry." And then a prayer. "Oh God, forgive me." She felt his hand on her head. "My love," he said. He took hold of her and drew her up again. She couldn't look into his face, wanting to hide her own. Michael took off his shirt and put it around her shoulders. When he tipped her chin up, she had no choice but to look into his eyes again. They were wet like hers, but filled with light. "I hoped you would come home someday," he said, and smiled. "There's so much I have to say, so many things to tell you." He combed his fingers into her flowing hair and tilted her head back. "We have the rest of our lives." She knew then that she had doubted he would forgive her again, but he already had. She could live with him forever and not know his depths. Oh God. "Oh Lord, thank you, thank you." She went into his arms, spreading her hands on his strong back, pressing herself as close as she could, her gratitude so strong she could hardly bear it. He was warmth and light and life. She wanted to be flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood, forever. Closing her eyes, she inhaled the sweet scent of him and felt she was finally home again. She thought she had been saved by his love for her, and in part, she had been. It had cleansed her, never casting blame, but that had been only the beginning. It was loving him in return that had brought her up out of the darkness. What? Rivers has given us so many different messages that are all conflicting each other. It was Michael's love. No, actually it was God's love. No, actually it was her love for Michael. Oh, but he's an idol, so she should just love God. But no, actually he's the wind and the rain and the breath and the life and whatever the fuck. "Amanda," Michael said, holding her tenderly. "Tirza, Sarah," came the still, soft voice, and she knew the one gift she had to offer, herself. Angel drew back from Michael and looked up at him. "Sarah, Michael. My name is Sarah. I don't know the rest of it, only that much. Sarah." Michael blinked, his whole body flooded with joy. The name fit her so well. A wanderer in foreign lands, a barren woman filled with doubt. Yet Sarah of old had become a symbol of trust in God and ultimately the mother of a nation. Sarah, a benediction. Sarah, a barren woman who conceived a son, his beautiful, cherished wife who would someday give him a child. How does he know that? "It's a promise, Lord, isn't it?" Michael felt the warmth and assurance of it enter every cell of his body. He held out his hand. Oh, so cheesy. "Hello, Sarah." She looked endearingly confused as she placed her hand in his. He shook it and grinned down at her. "I'm very pleased to meet you. Finally." Michael laughed and pulled her into his arms to kiss her. He felt her arms around him as she kissed him back. She was home for good this time. Not even death would part them. When they drew breath, Michael swung her around and lifted her above him joyously. She threw back her head and spread her arms wide to embrace the sky, tears of celebration streaming down her cheeks. Oh my God. She's still naked. She's like completely naked. Michael had once read to her how God had cast a man and woman out of paradise. Yet for all their human faults and failures, God had shown them the way back in. Love the Lord your God and love one another. Love one another as he loves. Love with strength and purpose and passion, and no matter what comes against you, don't weaken. Stand against the darkness and love. That's the way back into Eden. That's the way back to life. That last part was all in italics, and I don't even know who is supposed to be saying that or thinking that or what. I don't know if it's Rivers saying it to the readers or if that's Michael thinking of it. Who knows? Epilogue. Weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning. Sarah and Michael shared many happy years together. Surprise, surprise. On their 7th anniversary, their prayers were answered with the birth of a son, Stephen. Stephen was followed by Luke, Lydia, and Esther. Miriam and Paul also remained happy and had 3 sons, Mark, David, and Nathan. Both families prospered and remained lifelong friends. Together, they built a community church and school and welcomed many more settlers to their valley. Susanna Axel remained at the House of Magdalena until her death in 1892. With her help, dozens of young women once trapped into prostitution crossed the threshold to better lives. Several married well and became leading citizens. Though Sarah's family grew rich and famous, wow, there's no subtlety about that. Eventually including doctors, ambassadors, missionaries, and even a much decorated veteran of San Juan Hill. She returned for 1 week each year to the House of Magdalena. As long as she was physically able, she walked through the Barbary Coast and down to the docks, talking with young prostitutes and encouraging them to change their lives. When asked why, she said, "I never want to forget where I came from and all God has done for me." She frequently returned from the docks to the House of Magdalena, holding an angel by the hand. After 68 years of marriage, Michael was laid to rest. Sarah followed within a month. According to their wishes, only simple wooden crosses marked their graves. However, a few days after Sarah's burial, an epitaph was found scratched into her marker. "Though fallen low, God raised her up, an angel." So then in the back of the book, we have a note from Francine Rivers about why she wrote the book. I read a tiny bit of it in part 2. And then there's a reader's group guide. So small groups, Bible studies, Christian book clubs can do a study of this book together. So it's separated by these titles: Rejected, Resignation, Rescued, and then there's a verse and discussion questions. So for instance, how was Sarah/Angel rejected and betrayed? What were her earliest experiences with God and or the church? Gonna flip to another one to give you another example. List any ways in which God was calling Angel at this juncture in her life. Can you see the good he was working around her? List it. What about your life? How has God rescued you? How has he called you and worked good through that? So I think this discussion guide in the back is a really good example of how truly influential this book has been in Christian fundamentalism. This book is so revered. There's a literal discussion guide. That's how much people believe in this book and in its messages. So I'm really glad that I have gone back through this book. It was difficult at times, definitely very difficult and quite depressing, but it was also extremely eye-opening. I have forgotten so much that was in this book. I have forgotten most of it, truly. It was almost like reading this book for the first time. That's often how it felt. I was just like, what the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? Over and over again. I want to thank everyone so much who has been watching these Redeeming Love videos and helping me tear apart all of these horrible messages that gave us all this trauma as teenagers and as young adults. I've been really grateful for all of your comments and your affirmations and your contributions. This has been a really meaningful experience for me, and your participation has made me feel less alone. So thank you again. I hope to never read that any characters are shaking violently ever again. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.